I still remember the exact moment I saw it. A crisp white envelope taped to my front door, the HOA logo stamped in the corner like a seal of judgment. My breath fogged in the cold December air as I tore it open, expecting maybe a friendly reminder about trash pickup or a holiday newsletter. Instead, in bold black letters, it read, "Violation notice, $500 fine. The reason, unauthorized holiday decorations." I stood there on my porch, staring at the paper, my Christmas lights, twinkling softly behind me as if mocking the absurdity of it all. The lights weren't even that extravagant, just a warm string along the roofline, a glowing wreath on the door, and a few candy cane stakes lining the walkway. But apparently, I had committed the grave sin of putting them up too early. According to the HOA's holiday decoration policy, I could feel my jaw tightening. This wasn't just about lights. This was about control. About someone somewhere in a boardroom, deciding how much joy was allowed in December. I walked inside, the fine notice still in my hand, and dropped it on the kitchen counter. My wife looked up from her mug of cocoa. "What's that?" she asked. $500, I said flatly. "For Christmas lights." Her eyes widened. "You're kidding?" I shook my head. "Nope. Apparently, we're a danger to the neighborhood's aesthetic." For a moment, we just stood there, the hum of the refrigerator filling the silence. Then, somewhere deep inside me, a spark lit. Not the kind that comes from a string of bulbs, but the kind that comes from being pushed just a little too far. I wasn't going to take the lights down. In fact, I was going to do the opposite. That night, I walked over to my neighbor Tom's house. Tom was the kind of guy who kept a snowblower in pristine condition year-round, and had a stash of extension cords that could power a small city. When I told him about the fine, his face went from disbelief to a slow, mischievous grin. "They fined you for lights," he said. "Well, what if we all put up lights?" The idea hung in the air like the first snowflake of the seasons. But with the potential to start a storm. By the next morning, I was knocking on doors, telling the story, showing the fine notice, and watching the same spark ignite in my neighbors' eyes. Some were hesitant or afraid of the HOA's wrath, but others leaned in, whispering ideas about synchronized music, inflatable Santas, and enough lights to make the street visible from space. The HOA wanted to dim my Christmas spirit. They had no idea they'd just started the brightest rebellion our neighborhood had ever seen, and this was only the beginning. The next few days felt like living in a secret movie plot. Every time I stepped outside, I'd catch a neighbor giving me a subtle nod, like we were part of some underground resistance. The air was cold and sharp, the kind of December chill that made your breath look like smoke signals, and, in a way, that's exactly what we were sending. Signals that something was brewing. Tom and I started with the people we knew would be easiest to convince. Mrs. Henderson. For example, she was in her 70s, lived alone, and had a soft spot for anything that reminded her of the good old days. When I told her about the fine, she gasped so loudly, I thought she might faint. But then she smiled, that slow, knowing smile of someone who's seen enough nonsense to know when it's time to push back. "I've got boxes of lights in the attic," she said. "Haven't used them in years. Guess it's time." End of that afternoon, we had a small but determined crew. Tom, Mrs. Henderson, the Ramirez family from the corner, and the Parkers, who had 2 kids that were already buzzing with excitement. We met in Tom's garage, huddled around a folding table with mugs of coffee and a notepad. "This has to be coordinated," Tom said, tapping the pen like a general planning a battle. "We can't just throw up a few strings and call it a day. If we're going to do this, we go all in." We started making lists: who had spare lights, who could buy more, who had ladders, who could handle music. The Ramirez kids volunteered to make flyers for the rest of the street. disguised as holiday cheer announcements so the HOA wouldn't suspect anything. Of course, we knew they'd find out eventually. The trick was to get far enough along that they couldn't stop us without. Looking like the villains in a Christmas movie. The first night of setup was almost comical. We worked in small groups, pretending to be just putting up a few decorations, while actually mapping out where every strand, every inflatable, every glowing reindeer would go. Extension cords snaked across lawns like secret pathways. At one point, I caught sight of a dark SUV slowly rolling down the street. The driver's window was cracked, and I could see a clipboard in the passenger seat. HOA Patrol. I froze, holding a bundle of lights in my hands. Tom, without missing a beat, waved cheerfully at the car and shouted, "Evening." Just testing these before the big day. The SUV lingered for a moment, then drove off. We all exhaled at once. By the end of that week, the street was quietly transforming. You couldn't tell from a quick glance, but if you looked closely, you'd see the outlines of something bigger. Hooks on rooftops, stakes in the ground, bundles of lights hidden under tarps. The HOA thought they'd nipped my holiday spirit in the bud. What they didn't know was that they'd just planted the seed for the most spectacular rebellion our neighborhood had ever seen. And the countdown to the big night had already begun. The days leading up to the big night felt electric, like the air before a thunderstorm. Every time I stepped outside, I could sense the quiet hum of anticipation. Neighbors who barely waved at each other before were suddenly stopping in their driveways, leaning in close, speaking in low voices about light timers, extension cord lengths, and where to find the cheapest bulk packs of LEDs. We had a system now. Tom's garage had become our unofficial headquarters. By day, it looked like any other suburban garage lanoir in the corner. Shelves of paint cans, but by night, it transformed into a war room of holiday rebellion. The folding table was buried under tangled strings of lights, rolls of duct tape, and hand-drawn maps of the street with little X's marking where each display would go. One evening, as we were sorting through a box of donated decorations, the Parkers' youngest, Lily, tugged at my sleeve. She was maybe 7, with a gap-toothed smile and eyes that seemed too big for her face. "Are we going to get in trouble?" she asked. I crouched down so we were eye level. "Maybe," I said honestly. But sometimes, doing the right thing means breaking a silly rule. And this is about making people happy. She nodded solemnly, then scampered off to help her brother untangle a string of candy cane lights. The HOA wasn't blind to what was happening. We'd noticed more patrols, slow-moving cars with tinted windows, the occasional flash of a camera. One afternoon, I came home to find another envelope on my door. This one wasn't a fine, just a reminder about the decoration policy. The language was polite, but the message was clear. "We see you. Stop now." I took it straight to Tom's garage. He read it, snorted, and pinned it to the corkboard under the heading Motivation. By now, the transformation was impossible to hide. Rooflines were sprouting hooks, bushes were wrapped in net lights, and the Ramirez family had somehow acquired a 12-foot inflatable snowman that they kept deflated in their backyard like a sleeping giant. We worked in shifts, always, careful to keep the most obvious work for after dark. There was a strange thrill in it, like we were kids again, sneaking out past curfew. The cold bit at our fingers, but the laughter and whispered plans kept us warm. One night, as I was stringing lights along my fence, I saw Mrs. Henderson across the street, standing on a ladder in her driveway. She was wearing a puffy coat and a knit hat with a pom-pom, her breath puffing out in little clouds. She caught my eye and gave me a thumbs up. That's when it hit me. This wasn't just about me anymore. It wasn't even just about Christmas lights. It was about taking back a little piece of joy that someone had tried to ration out like it belonged to them. The date was set. The plan was in motion. And the HOA had no idea that in just a few nights, their precious aesthetic was going to be lit up so bright, it would make the North Pole jealous. The night before the big reveal, the street felt different. It was quiet, but not the usual kind of quiet. It was the kind that hums with anticipation, like the pause before a curtain rises. Every house had its lights hidden in plain sight. Timers set, cords tucked away. Inflatable decorations lying flat like sleeping giants waiting for their cue. I walked the length of the block, hands in my pockets, checking in with each house. The Ramirez kids were giggling as they tested their speaker system for the synchronized KYC. Ruby Kiss, Ruby Kiss, Ruby Kiss. Only Ruby Kiss has the luxurious texture. That is free. When Why Me Kiss, Welka Sins, Maze a Wave. And Ruby Sin and Why Me's level. A YA kiss, where Why Me say, ma YA's kiss. Why Me say, may, nay say, YA, my me say K scal a lie, dot Y, Kaweed may rely with so YA, sickhead, Guiland with, it a lud, we your all ellie maze s, kid UI secret to said Mrs. Henderson had baked cookies for everyone working late, her kitchen window glowing warmly against the cold. Tom was in his driveway, triple checking the master extension cord that would feed half the block's lights. We had agreed on one thing. No one would turn anything on until the exact moment. The plan was to flip every switch, plug in every cord, and inflate every decoration at the same time. One massive, undeniable burst of color and light. Of course, the HOA wasn't going to make it easy. Around 8 p.m., a black SUV rolled slowly down the street, headlights sweeping over driveways. I recognized the driver, one of the board members. A man who always wore a permanent frown, like smiling might crack his face. He stopped in front of my house, scribbled something on a clipboard, and drove off without a word. I didn't care. Tomorrow, he'd have more to write about than he could fit on that paper. That night, I barely slept. I kept picturing it. The moment the street would explode into light, the gasps from the neighbors, the look on the HOA's faces. By morning, the whole block was buzzing. People were out early, pretending to shovel snow or check their mail, or really just waiting for the signal. We'd chosen 6 p.m. sharp. The sun would be down. The sky a deep winter blue, and the cold would make the lights seem even brighter. At 5:55, I stood in my driveway, bundled in my coat, my hand resting on the plug for my main display. Across the street, Tom gave me a thumbs up. The Ramirez kids were bouncing on their toes. Mrs. Henderson stood proudly by her porch, her ladder, still leaning against the wall like a badge of honor. At 5:59, the street went still. No cars, no voices, just the sound of the wind moving through bare branches. And then, at exactly 6 o'clock, I pushed the plug into the outlet. In an instant, the darkness shattered. My house blazed to life. Every bulb, every wreath, every candy cane glowing. Across the street, Tom's roofline erupted in red and green. The Ramirez snowman shot up to full height, grinning down at the crowd. Music poured from hidden speakers. Jingle Bell Rock echoing off the houses. One by one, every home joined in until the entire street was a river of light and color. People cheered, kids laughed, and somewhere down the block, I heard the unmistakable sound of a car horn. Honking in celebration, it was beautiful. It was defiant. And it was just the beginning of the chaos we were about to unleash. The moment the lights came on, it was like the entire street took a deep breath and then exhaled pure joy. The glow was so intense it bounced off the snow, painting the night in reds, greens, golds, and blues. Music drifted through the air, not just from one house, but from several, perfectly timed so that Jingle Bell Rock seemed to dance from yard to yard. I stood there, my hands jammed into my coat pockets, watching as people emerged from Their homes drawn out by the spectacle. Kids in puffy jackets ran up and down the sidewalks, their laughter mixing with the music. Parents stood in clusters, sipping from steaming mugs, their faces lit by the glow, and then the cars started coming. At first, it was just a couple of curious drivers slowing down to take a look. But within minutes, word must have spread, maybe through a group text, maybe through social media, because soon there was a steady stream of vehicles creeping along the street. Windows rolled down so passengers could take photos and videos. I caught sight of the HOA president's car at the far end of the block. Even from a distance, I could see his jaw tighten as he took in the scene. He didn't get out. He didn't say a word. He just sat there for a long moment, then drove away. Tom came over, grinning like a kid. "We did it," he said, clapping me on the shoulder, "and they can't do a damn thing about it tonight." But the truth was, I knew this wasn't over. The HOA wasn't the type to just let something like this slide. They'd be back, and they'd come armed with rules, fines, and threats. Still, for now, none of that mattered. For now, the street was alive in a way I'd never seen before. Mrs. Henderson was handing out her cookies to anyone who passed by. The Ramirez kids were leading a group of younger children in a game of tag around the giant inflatable snowman. The Parkers had set up a table with hot cocoa and candy canes, free for anyone who wanted them. It was more than just lights. It was community. It was connection. And it was beautiful. By the time the last verse of Jingle Bell Rock faded into the night, the street had transformed into something I'd never seen before. Not just a row of houses, but a living, breathing celebration. The glow from the lights reflected in the eyes of everyone there, and for a moment, it felt like the cold didn't exist. I stood near the center of it all, watching as strangers became friends over cups of cocoa as kids, who'd never played together before, chased each other through the snow, their laughter ringing out like bells. The air smelled of cinnamon, chocolate, and the faint tang of cold metal from the light cords warming in the sockets. And then, just as I was thinking it couldn't get any better, I heard the sound of a car horn, not the impatient blare of traffic, but a cheerful, rhythmic honk. I turned to see a line of vehicles slowly making their way down the street, hazard lights blinking in unison. At the front was a pickup truck, its bed loaded with wrapped boxes and a banner that read, "Merry Christmas from Bright Mart Hardware." The truck pulled over, and a man in a red scarf hopped out. "Who's in charge here?" he called. I hesitated, then stepped forward. "I guess that's me." He grinned and shook my hand. "Name's Carl. I own Bright Mart over on Main. Saw the videos online. You guys are blowing up. Figured we'd bring some gifts for the kids and cover that fine you got." For a second, I just stared at him. "You? What?" "Consider it a sponsorship," he said with a wink. "You've done more for holiday spirit in this town than anyone in years. We want in." The crowd erupted in cheers. Kids swarmed the truck as Carl and his team started handing out toys, candy, and even more strings of lights. I caught Tom's eye, and he just shook his head in disbelief, grinning from ear to ear. Somewhere in the crowd, I spotted the HOA president again. He was standing off to the side, arms crossed, his expression unreadable. For a moment, I thought he might march over and try to shut it all down. But then he saw the news crew setting up their cameras, the microphones with station logos, the reporters already interviewing neighbors. He turned on his heel and walked away without a word. The rest of the night was a blur of music, laughter, and light. People danced in the street. Someone started a snowball fight. The Ramirez snowman became the unofficial mascot of the festival, posing for photos with anyone who asked. By the time the last car drove through and the music faded, it was well past midnight. My hands were numb, my cheeks ached from smiling, and my heart felt Fold as we started packing up the cocoa tables and folding chairs, Mrs. Henderson came over, her cheeks rosy from the cold. "You know," she said, "I think this should be a tradition." I laughed. "You think the HOA will let us?" She gave me a look that could melt ice. "Let them try to stop us. After tonight, this isn't just your fight, it's ours." Over the next few days, the videos went viral. Local news turned into regional coverage, and before long, we're getting messages from people across the country, stories about their poacher. Own battles with overzealous HOAs about how they wished they could do what we'd done. The HOA did send another letter. This one was longer, full of legal jargon and threats of escalating fines. But it didn't matter. Brightmart had already paid the original fine, and now we had lawyers? Yes. Actual lawyers offering to represent us pro bono if the HOA tried anything else. And then came the twist I never saw coming. The city council reached out. They wanted to make our festival an official annual event, complete with street closures, food vendors, and live music. They even offered to cover the cost of permits and security. When I told the neighbors, the cheer that went up could probably be heard in the next town over. A week later, the HOA president resigned. No explanation, no farewell letter, just gone. The new board, perhaps sensing the shift in the wind, sent out a holiday appreciation letter, thanking everyone for bringing joy to the community. It was the closest thing to an apology we were ever going to get. That next Christmas, we didn't have to hide our plans. We didn't have to work in the shadows or pretend we were just testing lights. We went bigger, brighter, louder. The festival drew thousands, and the proceeds from donations went to local charities. Standing there on that second year's opening night, watching the street blaze to life again, I thought back to that first envelope on my door. That $500 fine. That petty attempt to dim a little joy. If they just left me alone, none of this would have happened. There would be no festival, no viral videos, no annual tradition. But they pushed, and in pushing, they lit a spark that turned into something far bigger than any of us could have imagined. Sometimes the smallest acts of defiance grow into the brightest beacons. As the music swelled and the lights danced across the snow, I felt a hand on my shoulder. It was Tom, holding 2 mugs of cocoa. He handed me one and nodded toward the crowd. "Look at this," he said. "All because you wouldn't take down a string of lights." I smiled, taking a sip. The cocoa was hot, sweet, and perfect. "Because we wouldn't," I corrected him. The night stretched on, full of warmth and laughter. The kind of night you wish you could bottle and keep forever. And as I stood there, surrounded by friends, neighbors, and strangers who felt like family, I realized something. The HOA had tried to find me for Christmas lights. Instead, they'd given all of us a reason to come together. And that's a debt they could never repay. And that's how a $500 fine turned into the brightest, most unforgettable Christmas our street has ever seen. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit that like button. It really helps more people find these videos. Subscribe if you haven't already, because I've got plenty more stories just like this one coming your way. Drop a comment below and tell me, what would you have done if the HOA fined you for Christmas lights? Thanks for watching, thanks for being part of this community, and remember, sometimes the smallest spark can light up an entire neighborhood. I'll see you in the next one.